right, so a little bit older disciples. How many of you like to follow rules? How many of you don't like to follow rules? Okay. Now, I probably shouldn't share this story with you because as a pastor, it's maybe not the perfect example. But I found it interesting in my life. I've taken some time to do some psychological assessments. And so if you want to know more about those types of assessments, you can go back and talk to Jess about them and how they take them. But I just recently took one again, and one of the scores that I got was a moderately low score in politeness. And I thought, well, I normally think of myself as a pretty polite guy. I mean, I use my manners and I try to be pretty nice to people. But then when I read the subheading, it says, well, you're not particularly deferential to people. And so what that means is that when somebody speaks, if I don't respect what they're saying, I just completely disregard what they're doing. It also means that I'm not markedly obedient. All right? And I push back when I'm challenged. And I'm willing to confront other people. And so when I read that, I guess maybe I can understand then why I received such a low mark in politeness. And this is, again, something I'm sure my parents are not surprised at all by, and they're probably laughing as they watch this at home going, yes, that is correct. It is something I've had to deal with even becoming a pastor, as I had to sit before my district committee, and they said, well, it shows here that you're willing to confront authority, and they all sit nervously kind of wondering and waiting for me to answer how that might manifest. You know, I mean, we have a rule book in the Methodist Church that's like this big, and what does it mean if we make you a pastor? Are you going to really follow that rule book? And so, folks, many of us, I think, struggle to follow rules. I think we understand that we all have rules, and yet some of us follow them strictly out of obedience because we like what it gives us. Maybe it gives us a sense of control. Maybe people seem to hold us in esteem when we do it. Others of you, like myself, like to push the boundaries of stuff. I'm sure no one here has ever tried to go just a few miles over the speed limit or, done some of those things. And so, folks, we wrestle with what it means to follow commands, to follow the rules. And again, just as I told the young disciples, rules and commandments are not bad things, okay? They're meant to keep us safe. They're meant for us to, thrive and flourish as people, and yet sometimes we operate out of a mindset or an intention that isn't necessarily correct. Back in the 70s, Billy Joel wrote a song, "Only the Good Die Young." And in many ways, our culture has, in some ways, taken on this idea that rules can be bad, especially rules that prevent us from experiencing pleasure and power in other things. And so one of the lines in his song is, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. And so we've painted a picture in many ways that the things that God calls us to do are in some ways preventing us from experiencing this great life. So today we are going to move in and we're going to look at chapter 20 in the book of Exodus, and this is the final week of our series on Exodus, A Journey Towards Freedom. And I've called this message, Discipline Equals Freedom. And so let's go in and let's look at how God gives a set of commands to the Hebrew people and look at perhaps why God gives them those specific rules and how we might utilize those in our life. So to begin in verse 1, and God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt in the land of slavery. Now, before we get into the actual commandments, there's some things we need to explore. And the first one is that God is specifically speaking to the Israelite peoples, okay? He's not saying, Moses, I need you to go tell these people the Ten Commandments. In this specific chapter, God is literally speaking to the people. And this is important because God doesn't want us to get confused. He doesn't want us to get mixed up in the messenger. And this is really important, especially for somebody like me, because maybe I just would think Moses is full of crud and would just think I could ignore him and what he had to say. But when God speaks, I have to pay attention differently. I have to make sure that I have a right hearing and a right understanding. Now, the other important thing to think about when we hear the commandments is that we need to place the commandments in the context of relationship. That again, these are not just a list of rules that we're meant to follow simply for rules' sakes. Okay? But they're given to us in the context of a relationship, and how we follow and adhere to those rules is indicative of our relationship and how we view God. Next, as we see, or as we'll see later in the chapter, there's a very important idea here called reverence. And we often hear or think of reverence in the Bible, and we hear the word or the words or phrase, the fear of God. Okay? And reverence is simply not an emotion like we're scared of God, although in this case the people literally are scared because God is talking to them. But reverence is this sense of awe, this idea, this great respect, profound respect that we have for God. And so, again, we need the context of relationship in the context of reverence in order to understand the role that we have when it comes to the commandments. All right? So now you're probably wondering, Josh, now that you've got some context in there, how does this idea of discipline equal freedom? Well, first, if we look at the word discipline, there's a number of definitions, and so we have to choose the right one. When we think of discipline, we can often think of, for instance, a parent disciplining their child because they've done something wrong. All right? We can look at it as completely negative, like, oh, we're getting punished. Or we can look at discipline as an instruction and a method of growing, okay? And again, if you remember that we are disciples, that's what our identity is. We are disciples of Jesus Christ. The root word for discipline is disciple. And so again, it means that we look not only to espouse a certain set of beliefs, but also that we live those beliefs, that we train ourselves each and every day to follow the wisdom and the things that Jesus has set for us to do. So let's go through and let's begin to just briefly look at the commandments. And again, we could spend an entire series going probably through each one of these. And so I'm only going to just look at these very simply and encourage us to think about some of these commandments. So the first two, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. So again, there's a context here, a command, an imperative to say, you aren't to have any other gods. You aren't to make any images or any idols of anything else. Now again, folks, we can live and simply follow the rules and say, yep, I'm not serving any other gods, so I'm good, right? But if we look at these a little different, does it mean, do we truly have our focus on God? Is all of our focus on God, or are we distracted? And maybe we don't have any weird animal idols or anything like that they're worshiping, but maybe some other distraction in our life has pulled us away from God. Maybe there's an addiction, maybe there's a problem, maybe there's a career or family that we have elevated and put in the space of God, and that's become an idol. So again, we have to test these. We have to think about these. Why would God give us these? How can we look at them at a deeper level than just simply imperatives that we're to take at face value? You shall not misuse the name of the Lord, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Again, what does that mean? How many of us would like if our name was inserted with a curse or an expletive intention? How many of us would want our name misused and abused and misrepresented by the people that claim to serve us? What does it mean to understand that God's name is holy and we are to honor and revere that? Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. Now again, if you look at the first 3 commandments before that, they're all formed in a negative way, right? You shall not, you shall not, you will not. But those first 3 commandments are also specific to the relationship with God, right? All 3 of those have to do specifically with the people's relationship to God. These next 2 are formed in a positive manner. In fact, they're the only 2 that are formed positively. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. Again, how many of us keep a Sabbath? Something that spiritually nurtures us. Not just a day off when we can go run errands and do whatever. Because again, Sabbath isn't about just doing what we want. But Sabbath is intentional rest. Intentional things that fill us up. A time to be with family. What about honoring our parents or our elders? Think about the relationship problems that might be solved if we would just simply have respect for people. But this goes also to the reverse, because we have to remember that we are all children. And there will become a time when our parents move to a stage in their life where maybe they're not able to care for themselves. And what is our role? What does it mean to honor our father and mother in those situations? Do we just ship them off because now they're an inconvenience and we put them in a nursing home? Or do we find ways to specifically honor them? And again, I want to create a caveat here because I'm not saying nursing homes are bad. All right? I'm just asking us to look at the intention we have with how we treat some of the elderly people in our lives. For children especially, what does it mean to listen to your mom and dad or your grandmas and grandpas or whoever it is that takes care of you? You know, I continue to be just baffled by some of the things that I see in children. Some of the complete disrespect that children have for their parents. And I've also seen parents have complete disrespect for their kids, and I've just gone like, it just sets me back going, what in the world are you doing? You're screaming at your child for absolutely no reason. There's got to be a more constructive way to deal with that. So again, think about how many problems in our families might be solved if we would simply honor each other. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false witness. And you shall not covet. Again, in the New Testament, Jesus tells us that murder begins in the heart. It begins with anger. And folks, in so many of these cases, we can take these commandments simply as legalistic rules to follow. You know, the Pharisees thought they were just great and wonderful because they never murdered anybody. But again, that's not the intention of this commandment. It goes so much deeper. I think it calls us to look at it causes us to look at our heart and say, okay, where is my anger? How am I perceiving people? Am I being judgmental of the people around me? You shall not commit adultery. Again, how many family problems would be solved if people, husbands and wives, we're loyal to each other. Instead of allowing their minds to go out to other things, whether it be other people, pornography, things that come up and steal us away. You shall not steal. You're not to take what isn't yours. You're not to give false witness for your political or power gain against your neighbor. No, you're supposed to treat your neighbor with respect. And you shouldn't covet the things that you see other people have. Yeah, that guy's got a nice car, but that doesn't mean that you should necessarily want that. Or this person's got a great job and you just decide that you're going to begin to covet and care for that and think evil things about that person. So again, friends, I've said reverence provides the context for obedience. And so Moses goes to the people and he says, "Do not be afraid, for God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you and keep you from sinning." And so quite literally, as I said, the people are scared because God is literally speaking to them. In fact, they go and they plead to Moses, "Please do not have God speak to us anymore because we are so scared or so afraid of his voice." But Moses says, you know what? Don't fear. God has come to test you so that that reverence, that awe, that focus on God will keep you from sinning. And so, folks, again, let's think about the rules and the laws that we have in our life. And I'm going to say that when we think deeply about those laws are intended for us to flourish. All right? Can I drive 100 miles an hour on the highway? Sure, I can if I'm willing to pay the penalties, right? I might get a nice speeding ticket. But what else might happen? What happens if I lose control of my vehicle and I hit someone else and take their life? Even from a financial perspective, is going that 5 or 10 miles over the speed limit worth that $200 or $300 ticket that you might get just so that you can arrive at your destination 2 minutes earlier than you would have? You know, wouldn't it be better maybe to just leave 15 minutes earlier to get there in time? And so, friends, all of the things that we just read have all been given to us so that we can flourish, so that our families will thrive, that our communities will thrive. And so I invite you to think for a moment what the world might be like if we just took these 10 things and we implemented them into our lives. And again, not just from a legalistic perspective of just following the rules for rules' sake, but what does it mean when we truly begin to step in and understand that God gave these to us out of a relationship? That again, he's trying to create order in our life and say, look, if you guys do these things, you're going to live an abundant and free life. If you don't, there's going to be problems. I know what I'm talking about. You know, so often we like to think that we understand the big picture, but oftentimes we don't. You know, when we get in that car, when we've had a few too many to drink and think, oh, it's not a big deal, we're not seeing clearly in that moment. And the consequences can be devastating. Now, we're not going any farther in the book of Exodus today, but look at the problems the Israelite people have. And again, God says, I'm going to test you. I'm going to see if you are really designed, if you really want to be in relationship with me. If you do, you'll follow these, because this is your training ground. I need you to do these things so that you can be a people that thrives. Because guess what? This is just the next step in the journey, because when I take you to the promised land, you've got a lot of work to do there. And if you can't get these 10 simple rules right, you're never going to make it over there. Because you're going to be seduced by all of the foreign gods of the Canaanites. You're not going to be the light and the representation to the people that I've called you to be. You'll get lost amongst them. And so, friends, this is where discipline comes in for each of us. And we have to discipline ourselves on a daily basis to understand that when we follow these commandments that God has given us, we move to a place where we are flourishing, where we can be a light to all people. Now, I listened to a renowned psychologist this week talk about the fact that in average person's life, they will influence at least 1,000 people in their lifetime. And then, if you think about that those 1,000 people that you have influenced go out and influence another 1,000 people, you've just had an influence one person away to 1 million people. And if you do that twice, it's 1 billion people. So friends, think about what it might look like for us as Christians to begin to step deeply into our relationship with God, look at these commandments from a sense of reverence, a sense of awe, and think about the influence that we might have on the world if we would just but live these things out. I think that's a pretty powerful statement for all of us. It doesn't mean it's easy. Again, we follow rules for different reasons. You know, I have the tendency to push back. I have the tendency to have to evaluate the things because I'm not just going to believe someone just because someone makes a rule. That's just me. But I have evaluated these, and these are good. And these will lead to life, and these will lead us to create the light that we need. And so, friends, I know it seems difficult in a world that is given to relativism, that there is no such thing as truth, that we can create our own rules, that we're just, I don't really need to believe in God or have a relationship with God. I can just be a good person by following a few of the rules that I want. But think of the influence that Christians can have on the world if we would simply follow these commands and go out and influence the people around us. So that is my goal for you this week. I want to encourage you to take a look at these 10 commandments. Go back and visit them. Which one of these commandments challenges you the most? Once you've identified that, I want you to create a specific habit or a specific step that you can take to step more deeply into that this week. So again, maybe it's you found that your focus isn't completely on God. Maybe you've let, let's just say, family take too high of a role. You put your kids first above everything. What does it look like for you to create a quiet time and tell the kids, you know what, no, I need 15 minutes so that I can spend some time in prayer or read scripture? Maybe you've been just running crazy with all of the busyness. You're working tons of hours. You've got all of these other things on your plate. Maybe it's time for you to take a little bit of Sabbath and discipline yourself each day to say, you know what, I'm going to take 15 minutes, a half an hour, and I'm going to do something each day that fills my soul. Or maybe you're in the comparison game and you begin to covet some of the things that your neighbor or a friend has. Maybe you go each day and you get a piece of paper and a pen and you grab one thing that's in your house and you look at it and you write a grateful statement and you say, you know what? I'm really grateful that I have this. Thank you, God, for the abundance that I have in my life. Because here's the thing, folks. Discipline requires work. It's training for us. And the road's not always easy. Because if you're anything like me, sometimes you don't like the idea of routines and discipline. All right? Kind of like to do our own thing, or at least I do a lot of the time. And it gets me into trouble. Yeah, everybody looks at Sarah and she just smiles. But again, folks, I I really believe that discipline, that instruction, that learning, truly learning to live and do the things that Jesus taught us to do on a daily basis will be the greatest cure that this world will ever receive. God bless.